October 1994. Season 3 of Homicide hit the air. With fresh faces, a different time slot, and a new co-executive producer at the helm, writer Henry Bromell.
I said to my agent, I would like to meet some of the really good writer-producers of hour-long drama. And he said, like who? So I gave him a list, like 4 or 5 names. And the top of the list was Tom Fontana. And as it happened, Tom Fontana was in town looking for someone to work on Homicide, but my agent failed to know that. So I had to fire him.
When Tom told me he was hiring this guy from Los Angeles to come out and run the show, I was expecting one of these. I didn't know what to expect, but you know, I had my own kind of stereotypes about what a Hollywood producer was. You know, somebody very flamboyant and I don't know what else. You know, just kind of shallow and stuff like that. And Henry comes in, and Henry is this very serious kind of writer.
That's a loss of life, Frank. That's murder.
Well, stupid me. I didn't know that there are now 2 kinds of homicides. I didn't know that cops got to decide whose life was valuable, whose life is worth avenging.
It was refreshing.
I thought that many of the episodes of the first 2 seasons, so-called, were terrific. I mean, really good. And I couldn't imagine television getting a whole lot better than that. It seemed to me the trick was, how do you maintain that quality of writing over 13 or 22 episodes?
We were always trying to challenge ourselves, you know. I think that's one of the things we wanted to do, was always to find a way to challenge ourselves. And that is where Tom Fontana was terrific, the staff of writers that we brought into it, and the actors we had, and we kept evolving and finding other ways to tell stories.
Given an initial order of 13 episodes, Fontana and Bromell created a rough outline of the season and assigned specific shows to the growing writing staff, which added Julie Martin, George Zamacona, and Bonnie Mark. The increased talent also led to spirited debate.
There'd be some very good fights. I mean, down and dirty sometimes. We would push each other. We would say, well, we've done that kind of story before. We should do it this way. Or this is another way of looking at the character and his perspectives on what's happening at that moment. Everybody's
writing was quite different, quite distinct. So it wasn't homogenous at all. It was a question of figuring out how to orchestrate and make all these different voices work in one show. But since the show was about many voices, including voices of the dead, that actually worked. It was appropriate.
For us, it was about never really being satisfied with what we had done, never letting it settle in any kind of way, that the storytelling and the approach to it, we wanted to reinvent every week.
I think what it did was add energy to the writing, you know, because just because of the fighting, it just lent itself to a great deal of some very good ideas.
Homicide moved from Thursday nights to Fridays, where the ratings struggle followed. The creators, meanwhile, fought to increase the show's network presence.
Our problem was we never could get any promotions for the show. So as much as you can say one part of NBC, would like it, the promotion department never ran spots for it because, we didn't have enough action. We weren't shooting the guns off or car chases, so they wouldn't cut spots for us.
When you're at that slot, people tend to sort of forget about you. They don't make the same demand. I mean, who does well on Friday night at 10? We spent half our time grousing about NBC and how useless they were, and the other half of the time thinking how lucky we were that they were letting us make this show.
We used to get down into the high 30s and, in those places, and we would kind of spike, periodically. And we had this very, very strong core audience for the show. But if you never advertise the show, then you can't widen its, its base in a sense.
On-set difficulties with actor John Polito led to his departure. Jim Yashimura got a surprising call from Fontana breaking the news.
He called me up and he just said, it was very cryptic, he says, that son of a bitch is dead. He's dead. I said, Tom, he says, he's dead. And it was very kind of godfatherly Italian. I said, what's going on? He says, Corsetti, God, he's dead. And I want you to write it, he's dead. And I want you, and he says, all I want you to do is I got this visual that is just like he's, you know, they're pulling him out of something. They're pulling him out of the water. And I said, anything more? And he just said, Crussetti's committed suicide, that's it.
I think what we did was, especially like in the death of Crussetti, we were able to really use that as an opportunity to explore these characters left behind in a fuller way. In that particular episode, the relationship between Meldrick and Volander, which was very tense and really kind of crystallized in a whole other way.
Crussetti is my case, and it's my responsibility. What you're doing is called obstructing justice.
No, what I'm doing is called investigating in an impartial manner instead of dirtying a man's reputation.
What are you scared of, Meldrick?
Not you.
But that only would have happened, you know, because Crussetti died. And to see Pembleton out there saluting, you know, as the casket goes by, told us a lot about who he was. That's a value we would have never gotten if we hadn't killed off a regular.
Conversely, a new shift commander arrived in the form of Isabella Hoffman, following NBC's request for another female character.
What we liked about it, as I remember, is the idea of having someone for Giardella. I mean, that is not something you'd expect. I don't mean as a romantic interest or anything, but I mean just as a strong female character that he had to deal with.
Well, I disagree with your call, but I had no intention of embarrassing you.
No, intention or not, that's what you did. Don't undermine me in front of the squad, okay, Al?
Plot lines focused on the rising tension in the squad. The growing conflict within Bayless also began to emerge.
Any writer can't help but, when given an innocent, but to want to corrupt it. I wrote a scene, I remember early on in the season, where Bayless pulls his gun on a grocery clerk.
You gotta avoid the sale, is that right, huh? Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Do you still have to void the sale, huh? No! Okay.
Now, I would like a bag, please. Paper, not plastic, please.
And I thought of it as funny. It is funny. But if you allow yourself to do that, you know, who knows what else you could allow yourself to do.
That's the guy. He held a gun on me. Are you gonna arrest him or what?
Before NBC upped the final order to 20 shows, a prominent Red Ball cop shooting storyline was added, in case Homicide had to depart with a bang.
Tom had written an episode and called us up and said, listen, NBC is still thinking about whether or not they want to do this episode, but I want you guys to come up with an idea about how to, you know, end the show. And we said, what? You know, this was a big surprise that maybe we weren't going to be coming back. And so he said, think about it, you know, I'll give you a couple of days. And so I said to George, you know, most shows, when they really want to like juke things up, like really like, you know, get things going, they'll shoot one of their main characters or put that character in some kind of very precarious position, you know, one of those cliffhangers where you don't know whether that character is gonna live or die. And I said, we should shoot 3 of them. And Zamakota, without missing a beat, says, yep, you're right, we should shoot 3 of them.
Police, freeze!
Because you don't expect it, we realized this would be an interesting thing to do. So we wrote it. And when we wrote it and we published it, the information was not contained in the script of like what happens. Like, do they live? So the actors were completely freaked out. They had no idea what their fates were.
Another provocative episode, Every Mother's Son, garnered critical acclaim. Homicide author David Simon, who would join the writing staff in season 4, instantly realized its impact.
Sean Nelson's portrayal of that kid rang so true, the killer, rang so true to so many young men and adolescents that I had reported on, encountered, been surprised by, and at points charmed by in years of reporting in Baltimore.
Hey, kid, you got a serious charge facing you.
What, that I shot that kid?
Ronnie.
Hey, what's the big deal?
I meant to shoot this other kid. Honest mistake. You can't blame me for that.
By the time those two mothers meet each other by accident in the aquarium, you're dying.
One of my first jobs coming out of college, I was a clerk in an emergency room at a children's hospital, Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. And one of the most indelible kinds of moments I had
He's in trouble?
from that experience was seeing these two mothers who had just lost their children to, one in a trauma and one whom I knew the kid had cancer and had been coming in for a long time with treatment, and just watching them sit in the waiting room of the emergency room, and they started to talk. When I thought of the two mothers in the aquarium, that's what I brought to that scene. That was something that I wondered what the mothers would say to each other. I was just very curious about, what do you say?
It takes you full circle. You are absolutely with the victim, as you would be any kid who was killed. And you are ready for vengeance at the beginning of that episode. And by the end, there is nothing that you can feel but despair and fear for the killer going to prison.
With the show's future in question, Levinson came in to direct The Gas Man, fearing it might be Homicide's swan song. To that end, he pulled out all the stops, using unique camera angles, colorful lighting, and a twist unseen in police dramas to date.
Why would a man cut off someone's head, save the weapon, take the head, and then send a photograph of the weapon to me in the Baltimore Sun?
It's about the sort of voyeurism of being a detective, but it's flipped, because now you're being spied on by and followed and so forth by the criminal. And it's the idea of these little fringe people who kind of circle around the event. And yet you can make that more interesting than the event itself.
Have they found the head yet?
Excuse me?
The head. The dead fortune teller's head.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Tell Frank he's looking in all the wrong places.
Anytime the show did something unusual like that in a story, I think what it did was add to our library of stories that we could do, or at least expand our imaginations about what we thought the show was possible.
Our original concept was, what if you did a show in which our characters don't say a word? In other words, at all the moments where normally they would start to talk and that would be the scene, you leave the scene because you're telling another story. So you see a murder, let's say, and then you see Frank Pembleton and Bayless getting out of their car and coming up to knock on the door. But instead of doing the scene of opening the door and they ask you a bunch of questions, you have your guy run away out the back window and down the alley or something. Our guys are always just sort of crossing in the background, kind of doing their job, and you have to tell a whole story without words.
Despite ranking 88th out of 146 network shows, NBC President Warren Littlefield called Homicide second to none, before renewing it for a fourth season. Season 3 would be a hard act to follow.
The high point of the series was seeing the episodes when we were done on that season and thinking, this is a good show. This is a really good show. We've maintained the quality of the best shows of the first 2 seasons. Watching a show that you knew could not be on television any other place. And that was just a good feeling.